The rink lights were down to a winter dusk, the kind of dim that makes edges blur and the world feel like it's holding its breath. Lake dragged the tip of her point shoe across the frozen surface and drew a chalk-white arc. She'd been practicing footies on ice, because when the director says, "Absolutely not," that's dangerous, Lake hears, "Challenge accepted." Her driver had texted an hour ago, "Been called away. Emergency, sorry." The rink staff had locked up with a cheerful wave at the skater in the sweater, then left her to finish up. Lake had waved back with the sort of regal dismissal a ballerina earns after 14 years of being the best in the room. Now, silence. Her phone was a cold, dead rectangle. A few lights hummed to save energy. The exit sign glowed an unhelpful red over a metal door that simply didn't care about her schedule. Lake gathered her fur shrug tighter, the ethical faux fur, thank you, and muttered to the exit sign, "You, sir, are an obstruction in red, and I don't tolerate obstructions." The ice beneath her was a lake of glass. It reflected her in shards, a swan stitched out of stubbornness and silk, high-boned, chin-lifted, lashes that never seemed to stay curled after midnight. She didn't belong here, not really. Ballet lived in sprung floors and rosin and mirrors, but the ice with its clean snap and gleam gave her the kind of resistance she craved. It demanded sharpness, precision. A dancer could hide a wobble on wood. On ice, the truth skated up to you and said hello. Something squeaked behind her, the rubbery wheel of a mop bucket rolling across tile. Lake pinched a smile into place. Finally. She glided to the barrier, lifted the hinged gate, and tip-tapped onto the rubber matting on her point shoes, because socks were for mortals. She straightened her shrug, arranged her features into a benevolent queen, and called down the corridor, "You there, janitor? Be useful and open the door, will you? I've got rehearsal at 8 and a reputation to keep." Silence answered her. And then a low laugh, like velvet dragged over stone. He stepped out of the shadows near the vending machine. Not a uniform in sight. Tall as a locker, broad through the shoulders, forearms veined and bare where the sleeves of a black Henley had been pushed up. A ring of keys hung from his finger. His hair was the dark, unruly kind that looked like it wanted to fight wind and win. His eyes, in that low light, caught like amber catching flame. He glanced at the bucket beside him and then back at her, humored. "Janitor is a new one." Lake blinked. "I'm sorry, do you prefer custodial professional? Because I'm happy to be respectful if you'll just—" "Open the door," he finished, stepping closer. His boots sounded heavy and sure. "And if I don't?" "Then I'll go out the window," Lake said airily, gesturing at panes that didn't open. "Or I'll call my driver and have him tear the door off its hinges." Both are viable, though one is less tragic for the hinges. He arrived within arm's reach, and with him came an unexpected scent. Pine after rain, and something electric underneath. The atmosphere right before a storm breaks. "Your phone's dead," he said, nodding to her hand. "That's an opinion," Lake replied. She pressed the button. The screen remained a void. "Fine. It's a temporary setback. Are you going to help? Or do I need to write a strongly worded letter to management about the indignity of trapping artists in freezers?" He smiled then, slow and edged. "Artists should check the lock schedule." "Artists," she informed him, "don't read fine print. It's why we hire accountants. Now, keys." She held out her hand like a princess expecting a carriage. He didn't hand them over. He didn't even flinch. He just studied her with those warm, cold eyes, like he could listen to her heartbeat the way normal people listen to the radio. The hairs at the nape of her neck rose. "Name," he said. She flared. "Excuse me?" "Name," he repeated, mild as gravity. "And how long you've been out here alone." "I beg your pardon, Jan. Sir, person with keys. But I'm not here to pass a pop quiz. Humor me. She considered dramatics, a sigh big enough to fog the whole rink. Lake, she said, and watched his mouth move like he was tasting it. Most people try to joke. Lake who skates, Lake who freezes, low-hanging fruit. He didn't. How long? He asked again. She thought of lying and decided honesty might be faster. 2 hours? Possibly 3. Time is elastic when I'm rehearsing. His jaw tightened. The air shifted, thicker, warmer. The vendor lights made his eyes glow, a trick of fluorescence. Right? You shouldn't be alone in closed buildings after midnight, he said, like he discovered a rule about the universe and was personally offended she'd broken it. I patrol this block for a reason. Do you? Lake said, scrolling through her mental Rolodex of retorts. How noble. Be a darling and patrol the door open for me. He stepped past her, closer to the exit, and pressed his fingers to a panel hidden in the wall. The metal door clunked. Then it groaned. Then it did nothing at all. He exhaled, a short huff. Powers tripped to the security bar. Backup's supposed to kick on, but it didn't. We'll need to reset in the sub-level. Sub-level, she repeated, tasting dust. Like a basement, where horror movies happen. Like a maintenance corridor, he corrected, glancing back at her shoes. You're not walking down there on blades with ribbon. Point shoes, she snapped, offended on behalf of her feet. Hand-stitched. Freed Classic Pro, which is a sentence that means nothing to you but everything to me. Right, he said, amused. You have a pair of normal shoes? She stared. Do I look like the kind of woman who carries normal anything? That earned a fuller smile. Then I'll carry you. Absolutely not. His head tipped, considering her like a chessboard. You'll break your neck if you slip. Or your ankles. And then I'm explaining to a ballet company why their temperamental swan is molting. Lake opened her mouth to inform him she did not molt, and found her argument inconveniently overruled by her own ankles, which ached like tiny martyrs. The sub-level would be concrete, wet in places, unkind to silk. She squared her shoulders. Fine. But if you drop me, I'll sue you for emotional distress and the death of romance. Romance is resilient, he said softly. Arms. He turned his back to her and crouched. Lake hesitated, sniffed, and looped her arms around his shoulders. He rose with such smooth strength that she was briefly without breath. He braced his hands under her thighs just above the knee, and his heat sank through the thin layer of rehearsal tights like a vow. Close up, he smelled like forest and winter air, and something that made her teeth hum. Don't make a habit of this, she muttered into his shoulder. Of rescuing stubborn women? He asked. I try not to. He carried her down the side corridor, boots thudding softly. Lake could have sworn the dark didn't feel quite so dark beside him. The ice machine rumbled as they passed. The Zamboni stood like a sleeping beast with a vinyl tarp pulled over its back. They descended a narrow stairwell to a door marked Authorized. He bumped the bar with his hip, shouldered through, and set her on a dry patch of concrete. Stay, he said. She bristled. I don't do stay. He glanced at her, and for a heartbeat his pupils blew wide. Not human dark, but something else. Wild writing under the civilized edges. The hair along her forearms lifted again, and heat did a swift, scandalous sweep across her chest. He looked away, jaw working, then crossed to an ancient breaker panel. Fine, she said, rolling her eyes toward the rafters and pretending she hadn't just been told to stay like a misbehaving Pomeranian. Reset your breakers. I'll be, what did you call it? Obedient. Never said that, he murmured. He flipped 2 switches, wrenched a third, then palmed a hidden fuse with an ease that spoke of familiarity. Somewhere above them, a generator coughed. The concrete vibrated like a held breath release, then a pop, a sizzle, a thin ribbon of smoke. He moved before the smoke became anything more than a threat. Back, he ordered. No humor, no warmth, only command. Lake found her feet, walking without consulting her mouth. He peeled open a small panel, snapped a melted wire free, and calmly crimped two ends together with a tool he'd pulled from, where? His pocket? His hand? He worked surely, swiftly, like someone who'd fixed 100 bad nights. The emergency bar chattered awake upstairs. There, he said, replacing the panel. He blew out a breath through his nose, and the smoke seemed to change its mind and wander away. Lake realized she'd been holding herself in a ballerina's controlled line, everything tight and polite. She deliberately loosened her shoulders. Competent, she allowed, like a queen doling out favor. You must be very popular at parties where the lights go out. His mouth tilted again. I'm popular in the kind of rooms that value things working when they should. What rooms are those? She asked, and then immediately decided she didn't actually want to know. She wanted to categorize him as a very capable janitor who lifted her like she weighed less than gravity and smelled like a hike she'd pretend she hated. Simple. He offered his hand, palm up. Steps are damp. Let me dash. I can walk, she said. I know. He left his hand there anyway, patient as tide. She took it. It wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Her palm fit against his like a secret. They climbed. He didn't look back to check if she was keeping up. He just kept his pace steady, catching each slip before it happened, adjusting without comment, the way a very good partner would in a pas de deux, make the miracle look like it belonged to the ballerina while doing the heavy lift. It irritated her. It impressed her. Both felt like problems for later. At the top, the exit bar glowed a gentle green. He pressed. The door whooshed open to the night. Snow hissed sideways across the parking lot. Not graceful flakes. You couldn't choreograph to this. It was needling, relentless, blurring the city into a handful of lights suspended in milk. Roads will be slick, he said. Plows won't hit the side streets for hours. I can get you to a car. I can't promise you won't end up in a ditch if you try to drive it. My driver, she began, and then remembered the emergency and the dead phone and the way the world occasionally refused to center itself around her priorities. She pressed her lips together. There's an office upstairs. The manager has a kettle. I've commandeered it on several occasions. We could wait. We could, he agreed, like he'd already planned that 3 moves ago. He let the door hiss shut again and turned back toward the long glass view of the rink. The ice, under its low lights, looked like a held note. You hungry? She was, suddenly, acutely, in a way that made her feel human instead of made of music. Famished. Then we'll raid the secret stash. I adore a man with secrets, she said dryly. Good, he said, deadpan. I've got plenty. He led her to the stairs up to the mezzanine offices. Lake refused to limp, which meant she probably limped, which meant she scowled extra hard to compensate. He noticed, of course he did, and pretended not to. In the office with the glass wall, he flicked on a lamp. The room warmed instantly with the buttery light of paperwork and old coffee. He moved like he belonged here, setting the kettle, rummaging for mugs, plucking a small box from behind a stack of Rink schedules, and sliding it toward her. Bribery, he said. She lifted the lid. The box held shortbread, dark chocolate, a handful of wrapped caramels. His eyes were on her toes. Don't, she warned. You're bleeding, he said anyway, gently, like it insulted him personally. She was. A slow red crescent bloomed at the satin where a nail had decided it no longer respected architecture. Lake sighed the sigh of a saint and, with practiced brutality, peeled the shoe off. The ribbons unwound like a white flag. She set the shoe beside the other and carefully worked free a thin elastic sock and toe pads. The air hit skin, and she bit back a noise she didn't make in front of anyone but her mirror. Bathroom, he said, nodding down the hall. First aid kit's under the sink. Sit. I'll bring it. I can, she began. I know, he said again. She wanted to slap the word off his tongue and pocket it. She sat. He returned with a small metal kit and a towel warmed in the microwave, a flourish that startled a laugh out of her before she could catch it. He knelt. Hands that had torn wires apart cupped her foot like he was apologizing to the bones. He cleaned with saline. He pressed gauze. He wrapped. His touch was steady, warm, impersonal, in the way that felt the opposite of careless. You've done this before, she accused. I have sisters, he said, like that explained why he handled bandages and ballerinas with equal competence, and a pack who refuses to respect their own edges. People bleed. We fix it. We? She asked, tasting the word. So there's a club of midnight janitors who moonlight as emergency medics? He looked up through his lashes, and the lamplight smoldered in his eyes in a way that was not entirely common. Something like that. Lake held still, too aware of the scraped pink ribbon of his mouth, of the breadth of him kneeling in a room that normally smelled like coffee, and scheduling despair. She registered the subtle weight of his attention, how it gathered around her without pressing. The strangest sense came over her. Safety, but coiled with danger, like a wolf lying down at a girl's feet, not because it was tamed, but because it had chosen not to bite. Connor, he said after a beat, as if suddenly remembering manners, since I made you give me yours. She rolled his name around in her head and liked the click of it. Connor, thank you for saving the day. The phrase tasted awkward on her tongue. She wasn't practiced at gratitude. People usually got out of her way or she found a way through them. Being rescued felt like a costume that didn't fit yet. He taped the last edge and sat back on his heels. You saved your own day. I just opened a door. My doors usually open when asked, she said tartly. Do they? He murmured. He stood, rolled his shoulders as if shaking off a cold, and poured water over tea bags. Black for him, something floral for her. He didn't ask. He just got it right. It irritated her again. It warmed her traitorously. He handed her the mug and leaned against the desk like a fortress at ease. She blew on the steam. All right, Connor, who fixes things. What are you, really? He arched a brow. And if I say janitor, I'll tell you your cover story is awful. His smile ghosted. He regarded her for a long second, as if measuring how much world to put in her hands. Security, he said at last, for the block, the river trail, and anything within a mile that howls when it shouldn't. Like coyotes? She asked, picking the most reasonable option. Sometimes, he said, utterly noncommittal. Do you own the rink? She pressed, remembering the keys, the familiarity, the superior relationship with kettles. It belongs to someone who belongs to me, he said. I keep it safe. That wasn't an answer. It was a warning in gift wrap. Lake took a bite of shortbread to keep from chasing it. And you, he added, shouldn't call people names before you know what they are. She lifted her chin. I wasn't calling you names. I was assigning a function. It's efficient. You called me janitor like a command, he said. Not offended. Amused. You like commanding. I like being obeyed, she corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Of course. Commanding is what you do. Being obeyed is what the universe does for you when it recognizes your superiority. He laughed then, openly, surprised into it, and the sound hit her like catching a lift right in the center of a pas de deux, weightless for a heartbeat. She hated that. She loved that. So, she said briskly, because if she didn't change the subject, she might like him, and that felt unsafe. Connor, Security keys, smokeless smoke, smoldering eyes. Are you hiding fangs to complete the aesthetic? Or is that just lighting? He held her gaze. Something in his expression cooled and sharpened at once. A knife that remembered it was metal. What do you think? I think, she said carefully, you're the kind of man who shows up when doors don't open, and that men like that either have a savior complex, a hero contract, or a secret. What would you prefer? I prefer secrets, she said. They have better taste in entrances. Then here's one, he said quietly. This ice, this rink, this block, it's territory, Lake, not just property, and people who move through it after midnight aren't always people. Her mouth went dry. She thought of the way he'd smelled, of the low pull in her belly when his voice went rough, the kind that made something old in her blood sit up and listen. And you, she said, not a question. He sipped his tea. Keep this place safe, he repeated. It should have been a dodge. Somehow it felt like an answer. She drained her cup to give her hand something to do. Well, she said, wild and flippant and unknowingly precise. Good thing the janitor was also the alpha tonight. His eyes flickered, a tell she wouldn't have noticed if she weren't trained to watch breath and bone. He set his mug down very carefully. Alpha, he echoed, the word falling into the room like a coin into a well. The air seemed to deepen around it. Who taught you that word? No one, she said, and realized it was true. It had simply risen to her tongue like steam off tea. They looked at each other for a long moment that felt like standing on the lip of something enormous. Then, with very deliberate ease, he reached for a folded hoodie on the back of the chair and held it out. You're freezing. I don't get cold, she lied, taking it. It smells like me, he warned, as if that were a confession. Everything smells like you, she muttered into the cotton. He locked up the office, and they stepped into the mezzanine again to watch the snow smear the world. The rink was a sheet of sleeping moonlight. Lake tucked her knees up on the big leather chair and wrapped both hands around her mug like a cliché. Connor leaned on the rail. They didn't talk for a while. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was a truce neither of them had signed, but both were honoring. Do you ever skate? She asked finally, because silence made her think, and thinking made her sentimental. I can, he said. That wasn't the question. I don't, he said. Why not? He glanced down at the ice as if measuring it. I run warm. I leave tracks. That's not how ice works, she said, prim, because facts were the only shield she could reliably lift. He huffed. You'd be surprised. She could feel him without looking, the weight of him in the space, the attention like heat. She thought of calling him intimidating and decided he wasn't. Intimidating assumed you were afraid. Lake had a long list of fears: aging out of roles, disappointing the girl she'd been, being average. This was not fear. This was awareness. It irritated her again, being so aware of someone who didn't drop dead at her impatience. How old are you? She asked. He considered. Old enough to know midnight is never a good time for truth. Poetic, she said. Unhelpful. Would you believe 33? No. Then don't ask, he turned his head. What about you? 26, she said, then added, because she knew the face she wore could shave years off or add them in sharp strokes, and change. He smiled without teeth. I believe you. Good. Someone should. They watched the storm grind for another handful of heartbeats. The kettle clicked off behind them. The building hummed. Lake's toes began to ache in that way that wasn't simply physical anymore. It felt like a ledger being tallied somewhere in her bones. Thank you, she said again, because if she didn't say it now, she'd find reasons later not to. His eyes slid to her, unreadable. You're welcome. She set her cup aside and stood, testing the new wrap on her foot. Solid. He'd done it right. infuriatingly right. So Connor, who isn't a janitor, what happens now? Now, he said, I walk you home when the plows cut a path, or I call someone I trust to drive you, or you sleep on the manager's couch and pretend it's a novel experience. She glanced at the couch. She had once slept on the floor of a rehearsal studio in Paris because the key went missing, and pride is a terrible bedmate. I refused to be photographed drooling at such an angle. He straightened, the set of his shoulders like a decision. Then I'll take you. I know the back routes. The storm doesn't bother me. It bothers me, she said sweetly, but I'll pretend it doesn't, if you promise to drive like a gentleman and not like a man who thinks he's immortal. He didn't blink. I don't drive like I'm immortal. I drive like I'm responsible for everyone in a 10-mile radius. Oh, she said, caught off guard by the simple gravity of it. How heavy? He shrugged one shoulder. It's what I am. What are you? She asked softly, too soft to be a joke. He looked at her then, head tipped a fraction, as if trying to decide how much of himself she could absorb without breaking. Connor, he said again, but there was more in it now. And you're in my territory, Lake, which means, for tonight, you're mine to keep safe. The words should have made her hackles rise. Instead, something in her uncoiled, something that prowled the edges of stages and had always been looking for a place that felt like a backstage before a miracle. Fine, she said, because she couldn't think of anything cleverer that wouldn't betray the bewildering relief that washed through her. But don't get attached. His mouth curved. I won't. Never happens. Liar, she said, and was startled at how intimate the accusation sounded. They gathered her things. The shredded shoe she refused to abandon, the shrug, her pride. He shrugged into a black jacket with a small stitched emblem over the heart. Wolf, stylized, a circle of river around it. She ran her finger over the thread without meaning to. He looked down at her hand and then at her. Pack crest? She asked, light as sugar, testing what she'd already intuited. He didn't deny it. Family? Big family? Big enough. That sounds like code for loud. It is. She almost smiled. I don't do loud. You do, he said. You just call it applause. She wanted to bristle. Instead, she laughed, quiet, involuntary. They eased the door open. The wind shoved like a rude aunt. He stepped into it like it was nothing and turned, offering his hand the way he had on the stairs. She took it the way she hadn't planned to twice now. Snow pressed against their cheeks. His jacket hood shadowed his face in a way that made him look like every myth about men who walked out of forests with secrets in their pockets. He led, and she followed, and the snow that would have needled her skin felt like a minor inconvenience in the orbit of his presence. The parking lot was a silent ocean of white. A black truck hunched near the loading dock like something asleep and dangerous. He brushed the windshield with his forearm. The snow slid off as if it had been waiting to be told. He popped the passenger door, eased her in, then rounded to his side and slid behind the wheel. Lake looked around. The cab was clean in the way of a man who needed order to hold his storms. A dented thermos sat in the holder, smelling faintly of cinnamon. A leather strap hung from the rear view with a small silver wolf's tooth she pretended not to see. He started the engine. The radio clicked on low, classical of all things. A cello unspooled a line so rich she felt it in her ribs. He caught her glance and didn't apologize. It's good for storms, he said. It's good for everything, she replied, unable to help herself. He smiled once more, small and private, and eased the truck into the white. The tires gripped like oaths. The world shrank to the beams of their headlights and the rhythm of wipers. Lake sat with his hoodie around her, smelling like pine and winter and the unreasonable safety that came with belonging briefly to someone else's watch. She should have felt trapped. Instead, for the first time all night, She felt held. Connor, she said after a while, voice low to match the cello. I'm going to apologize. That's new, he said lightly. I know. She stared out into the snow. For calling you janitor. It was dismissive. It was funny, he said. And wrong. A beat. Apology accepted. Good, she said. Don't get used to it. Wouldn't dream of it. He navigated a slow turn. A plow roared past the other way, throwing a glittering wall of white. Lake watched it break and thought, absurdly, of curtains going up. Why Lake? He asked, after the kind of silence that had grown easy around them. My mother named me after the only place she felt calm, she said, surprised to hear herself answer at all. She used to drive to the reservoir at night and sit with the windows down. Said it was like the world got simple at the water. He nodded, as if that made perfect sense to him. It does. And Connor? She asked, because fairness mattered in odd ways. My father liked names your enemies could shout, he said, a ghost of humor in it. He said if a thing was going to echo, let it be strong. It fit him absurdly well. She let the cello and the snow do the talking for a while, and he let them, and in that was a promise of something she didn't have a category for yet. They turned onto her street eventually. The world had been trimmed down to what mattered: tire tracks, light, the low hum of the engine, and the knowledge that the door opened when he said it would. He rolled to a stop in front of her building and left the engine running. I'll walk you in, he said. Not a question. She wanted to refuse on principle. She didn't. They waded through the knee-high snow to the entrance. He stood just inside the vestibule while she dug for her spare key in the emergency pocket of her shrug. Thank you, she said again, because once you start saying it, it gets easier and truer. He inclined his head, that sovereign acknowledgement that made her want to curtsy despite herself. Get some sleep, Lake. Try to stop me, she said, which was bravado, for I won't. He turned to go. She reached without thinking and caught his sleeve. He paused, looked down at her hand, then back at her face. You forgot your hoodie, she said, lying for reasons she didn't examine. Keep it, he said. It'll muffle the world when you need it to. She swallowed. And if I need the world to sharpen? He stepped back into the foyer's thin light and her ridiculous need for more of it. Call, he said. My phone died, she said. Your voice works. The corner of his mouth notched. Swan. I'm not, she began. You are, he said, and not because of how you look on a stage. Something in her steadied at that. She nodded, because banter suddenly seemed too delicate a tool for the weight she felt. Good night, Connor. Good night, Lake. He left. The wind snatched the door behind him and scolded the vestibule. She went upstairs, hoodie to her face, toes singing their own red hymn, and when she reached her apartment and shut the door, she didn't feel alone. It wasn't the hoodie. It wasn't the tea. It was the sense that somewhere in the snow, an alpha had drawn a circle around her night and decided nothing crossed it. Lake leaned back against her door and laughed at herself, soft and stunned. Don't get attached, she had told him. Terrible advice. She padded to the window and watched the street blur. Somewhere under the storm and the white noise of a city that refused to sleep, a wolf raised his head and listened. She didn't know how she knew that. She just did. And down on the curb, a black truck idled a fraction longer than necessary, then moved away like a shadow that knew its way home. She might have imagined it. She'd never been prone to imagination. Until tonight. She pulled the hoodie tighter, sank into the couch, and fell asleep with one hand pressed to the stitched wolf where a heartbeat ought to be. Chapter 2. Snowbound Enemies. The door groaned open, and the world beyond it wasn't a street or a parking lot anymore. It was a wall of white, snow piled higher than the railing, drifting against the doors, hissing sideways in sheets that blurred the city into nothing. The wind roared like a living thing, so loud it stole the breath from Lake's throat. She staggered back, clutching her fur shrug. No, absolutely not. I refuse. This is barbaric. Connor pushed the door shut with one steady arm, sealing the storm out like it was a misbehaving guest. Told you the roads wouldn't clear. Lake threw her arms wide, exasperated. So we're trapped. Locked in this glorified freezer with you? Looks like. His tone was maddeningly calm, as though being snowed in with a prima ballerina was an everyday occurrence. She let out a sharp laugh, half hysteria, half outrage. I have rehearsals, obligations, a reputation. Do you have any idea what happens if I miss rehearsal? Someone else takes my part. Someone else gets photographed. The papers start calling her the rising star. Meanwhile, I get frostbite in a skating rink. Civilization will survive one night without you, he said. She snapped her head toward him, eyes flashing, spoken like a man who's never understudied Odette. That finally cracked the stone mask of his face. His lips twitched as if he was holding back a laugh. You're dramatic. And you're smug. She folded her arms, perfectly poised even in outrage. Which makes you a terrible alpha, by the way. His gaze sharpened, dangerous for a beat. You don't know what makes a good alpha. I know it isn't this, she shot back, gesturing at the locked doors, the humming generator, the ridiculousness of being trapped with a man who thought soup counted as sustenance. Soup's better than starving, he said, deadpan. Lake gasped as though he'd suggested she wear sneakers to a gala. Soup? I don't eat soup. Soup is sadness water. You'll eat it if you want to live? I'd rather perish. Good to know, he muttered, already walking toward the mezzanine office. I'll save the blankets for someone else. She stomped after him, her point shoes squeaking on the rubber matting. Blankets? Oh no, Alpha. You don't get all the blankets. We'll divide them like civilized people. He glanced over his shoulder, amusement glinting in those storm-colored eyes. Civilized people don't throw tantrums about soup. She sniffed, chin high. Civilized people don't gloat when someone is obviously suffering. By the time they reached the office upstairs, Lake's blood was boiling enough to rival the storm outside. Connor rummaged through cupboards with the efficiency of someone who had clearly done this before. He unearthed a stack of mismatched blankets, a box of instant coffee, and, horror of horrors, canned soup. Dinner, he said. That is not dinner. That is a war crime in a can. You'll eat it. He cracked one open and set it to heat on the little hot plate shoved in the corner. The saucepan buzzed faintly as it warmed. Lake perched on the desk, crossing her arms like royalty in exile. This is beneath me. Soup doesn't care who you are. Everything cares who I am. Not soup. The smell of chicken noodle filled the office. Lake wrinkled her nose dramatically. I don't eat carbs after 8. This is sabotage. Connor ladled the steaming liquid into 2 mugs anyway and set one in front of her. Drink. She tilted her chin. No. Yes. No. Yes. Unless you'd rather faint halfway through one of your pirouettes, she gasped. Are you threatening my fouettes? I'm protecting your ankles. She opened her mouth to argue, then froze as her body betrayed her. Her stomach growled, loud enough to echo. Connor smirked. Thought so. Reluctantly, she wrapped her hands around the mug, sipping cautiously. To her eternal horror, it was good, warm, salty, comforting in a way that felt like a betrayal of her refined palate. She scowled at him over the rim. I hate it. You're drinking all of it. I'm cold. It's medicinal. Sure. They ate in silence, broken only by the storm clawing at the windows. Lake refused to admit she was grateful for the heat seeping through her chest. Instead, she tossed her empty mug onto the desk and demanded, Blankets! Now. Connor unfolded 3 from the pile, tossing one at her without ceremony. She caught it with a huff, spreading it over herself like a queen begrudgingly accepting an offering. "This one smells like dust," she declared. "They all smell like dust." "Well, then you should fix that. I'll add it to my alpha duties." Dust control. She rolled her eyes, but when he pulled his own blanket around his shoulders and leaned back against the wall, she caught herself staring. The storm light through the glass made him look carved out of stone and fire, too solid, too calm, too something. She looked away quickly, tucking her feet under the blanket. The ache in her toes reminded her of the bloodied crescent hidden in her point shoe. She hissed softly without meaning to. Connor's eyes flicked immediately to her feet. "You're hurt." "I am fine." "You're bleeding." "I said I'm fine." "You're stubborn." "And you're nosy." He didn't argue further. He just disappeared into the tiny restroom and came back with the first aid kit, setting it on the desk with quiet authority. "Foot. Now." Lake blinked at him. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." "Give me your foot." She scoffed. "What am I, a house cat?" "More like a porcupine." He crouched, patient, waiting. "Foot." For a moment, pride and pain wrestled. Pride lost. With a dramatic sigh, she extended her leg, peeling off the ruined point shoe. The satin was stained, ribbons frayed, toe pads damp. He took her foot carefully in his hands, so gently it startled her. His palms were warm, steady, confident. He cleaned the cut, pressed gauze, wrapped it firm but not too tight. The whole time, he said nothing. He didn't tease. He didn't gloat. He just worked like a man who had done this 100 times, until the sting eased and she could breathe without wincing. When he finally looked up, their eyes met. Something unspoken hummed between them, louder than the storm. "There," he said simply. "Try not to destroy yourself before breakfast." Lake's throat felt tight. She tossed her hair with exaggerated flair. "I didn't ask for your help." "You never do." She pulled the blanket higher, hiding more than just her foot. "Don't get used to it." "I won't," he said, though his gaze lingered a second too long. The storm rattled the glass. The lights buzzed. They sat in the strange quiet that comes after arguments, neither willing to admit that somewhere between soup and bandages, the edges had shifted. Lake lay back against the couch, eyes closing despite herself. "Wake me if civilization returns." Connor leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes trained on the door like a sentinel. "Sleep, Swan." "I've got the night." And for the first time in years, Lake fell asleep knowing someone else was standing guard. Chapter 3. Lines in the Ice. The storm did not let up by morning. The rink's wide glass panels revealed nothing but an endless sweep of white, drifting higher against the doors with every gust. The world had disappeared overnight, leaving Lake with no company except the Alpha, who had claimed one of the office chairs like a throne. She woke on the couch, wrapped in 2 blankets, her hair a wild halo around her face. It took her a moment to remember where she was. The smell of bitter coffee snapped her awake fully. "Drink," Connor said, handing her a steaming mug. She squinted up at him. "Do you ever knock before invading someone's morning?" "This is my building," he said. "It is not." "You're just the janitor." The corner of his mouth tugged upward. "We're back to that? Until I find a better insult." She took the coffee, sipped, and made a face. "This is vile." "Better than nothing?" "I'd rather starve than drink this again." "Good," he said calmly, "because it was the last of it." Her scowl deepened. He was infuriatingly good at winning without lifting a finger. She tucked her blanket tighter, watching him move about the office as though he belonged there more than she ever would. Every motion was efficient, economical. She could tell he was the kind of man who could do anything with his hands. Fix wires, carry broken ballerinas, build something out of scraps. It irritated her more than she could admit. When he turned back, she realized he was carrying her ruined point shoe. "Don't touch that," she snapped. "You were going to throw it away." "I was going to retire it with dignity. It's falling apart." "Like most great artists," she countered. His eyes flicked up, catching hers. For a heartbeat, the silence was heavier than the snow pressing against the glass. He didn't say anything more, just set the shoe down carefully, almost respectfully, and turned toward the rink floor below. Lake followed, padding after him with the blanket still draped around her shoulders like a cape. What now? Are we supposed to sit here like prisoners until the storm decides to behave? We make use of the time. And what exactly does an alpha do to pass the hours in captivity? He glanced at her, the faintest spark in his eyes. "I patrol." "Patrol what?" "The snack machines. The space. The edges. Even snowed in, it's still my ground." He started walking along the rink's perimeter, eyes scanning as though enemies might emerge from the vending machine shadows. Lake groaned dramatically. "This is unbearable." "You're unbearable." She twirled once on the rubber flooring, the blanket flaring like a cape. "If I'm doomed to die in a rink, at least I'll make it theatrical." "You won't die here," he said firmly. "You sound very sure of that." "I am." There it was again, the conviction that made her chest tighten. He didn't say things as though they were opinions. He said them like truths carved into stone. She hated how much she wanted to believe him. By midday, the soup reappeared, and Lake nearly staged a mutiny. "Soup again? What are we, monks?" "You're welcome to chew on the ice instead." She huffed, taking the mug. "One day this storm will end, and when it does, I will never eat soup again for as long as I live." "Noted." They ate, sitting across from each other on the bleachers, snow glowing like a pale lantern outside the windows. Lake tried not to notice the way his presence filled the space. How calm he seemed even with the storm raging. She wanted to needle him, to break that composure. "So," she said sweetly, "tell me, Alpha, do you always lurk in skating rinks pretending to mop floors? Or was I just especially lucky last night?" "Lucky," he said without looking at her. "Interesting, because I would call it deeply unlucky. Your opinion doesn't change the truth." She nearly choked on her soup. "You're impossible. Frequently." They spent the afternoon circling each other in the empty rink, like two dancers who refused to admit they were already in a pas de deux. She practiced stretches on the boards, refusing to let a snowstorm rob her of discipline. He walked the corridors, checking doors and windows, his gaze always scanning, as if he could see threats in the quiet. When evening fell, the power flickered. Lake froze mid-plie. "Tell me that's not the generator giving up." Connor's jaw tightened, backup still holding. "And if it doesn't?" "Then we light candles and stay warm." "Candles," she said flatly. "Romantic. Practical. You have no poetry in your soul." "I have enough to keep us alive." The light steadied, humming back to full strength. Lake exhaled dramatically, collapsing onto the bench. "I hate this." "No, you don't." She glared at him. "Excuse me?" "You hate being out of control," he said simply. "There's a difference." She opened her mouth to argue, then shut it again. The accuracy stung more than the storm. She turned her head away, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. Night crept in. They retreated to the office again, blankets dividing the couch and chair like territorial lines. Lake lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the storm hammer at the glass. "You're still awake," Connor said quietly from the chair. "So are you," she shot back. "Wolves don't sleep deeply in storms. Ballerinas don't sleep when they're freezing." He stood, crossed the small space, and without asking draped one of the heavier blankets over her. She stiffened, ready with a retort, but the warmth sank into her bones too fast to fight. "Don't think this means I like you," she muttered into the fabric. "Good," he said softly, settling back into the chair, "because I don't like you either." But his eyes stayed open, fixed on the door, keeping watch while she drifted into uneasy sleep. And even though she would never admit it, Lake slept easier knowing he was there. Chapter 4. Cracks in the Ice. Morning came slowly, pale light filtering through the high windows of the rink. The storm hadn't stopped. If anything, it had grown bolder, throwing snow against the glass with fists of wind. Lake sat up on the couch, hair tangled, blanket sliding from her shoulders. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she caught sight of Connor, still in the chair, still watching the door like he'd never moved all night. "You're ridiculous," she said groggily. His head tilted, eyes sharp despite the hour. "Good morning to you, too. Do you ever sleep?" "Sometimes." "That's not healthy." He gave her a look that silenced any further lecture. Wolves, apparently, didn't concern themselves with wellness advice from ballerinas. Lake stretched her arms overhead, arching like a cat, then stood and patted toward the window. She pressed her palm against the glass. The world beyond was still nothing but white. No streets, no cars, no rescue, just silence, except for the storm. "Trapped another day," she muttered. "Looks that way." She spun to face him. "This is unacceptable. I have rehearsals. My company needs me." "They'll live without you." "You keep saying that like it's true," she snapped. "But you don't understand. If I miss even 2 days, someone else steps in. Someone else takes the spotlight. That's how it works." "You're afraid of being replaced," he said flatly. She opened her mouth to argue, then snapped it shut. Because he was right. The thought of some understudy twirling in her costume while she sat here eating soup made her blood boil. Connor stood, stretching like a man who had fought storms before. "You want a rehearsal? Fine. Use the ice." Lake blinked. "Excuse me?" "Practice," he said. "Dance. Skate. Whatever you need. It's all the same floor." "It's not," she scoffed. "Do you have any idea how hard it is to maintain balance on ice without skates?" "The surface isn't built for—" "Then adapt." She bristled. "Adapt? I don't adapt. I perfect." "Then perfect on ice." She glared at him, then tossed her blanket aside like a cape. "Fine. Watch and learn." She stepped through the gate, point shoes biting against the frozen surface. The ice was slick, unforgiving, but she had danced on worse. Cobblestones in Paris, polished marble floors in grand halls. She began to move, careful at first, then bolder. Her body remembered discipline, even if the floor protested. Pirouettes tightened, arms sweeping in clean arcs. She landed with a breathless flourish, heart hammering, cheeks flushed. When she turned, Connor was watching, not smirking, not mocking, just watching, with a focus that made her chest ache. "Well?" she demanded. "You're stubborn," he said, "but you're good." She blinked, startled by the simple honesty. Compliments were currency in her world, rarely given without agenda. This one landed heavier than it should have. "You're supposed to be unbearable," she muttered. "I am." They ate lunch, soup again, to Lake's great despair, and passed the afternoon circling each other with sharp words and sharper glances. She found herself asking questions she had no business asking. Where he came from, why he was here, what made him call himself Alpha. He deflected most of them, but every once in a while, something slipped through. A mention of a pack, of responsibility, of territory that wasn't just property, but family. By evening, the rink felt smaller, warmer, charged with something Lake refused to name. She sat cross-legged on the couch, hair tumbling loose, glaring at her latest mug of soup. "I can't believe this is my life now," she declared. "Soup and storms and a wolf who thinks he knows everything." "You're alive," Connor said. "Barely. You've done worse." "How do you know?" "Because you wouldn't fight this hard if you hadn't." She froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. He had no right to be right about her. No right at all. That night, the power flickered again. Lake tensed, but Connor was already moving, steady as stone. He lit a lantern, setting it on the desk. Warm golden light spilled across the office, chasing shadows into the corners. Lake stared at the flame, her voice quiet for once. "Do you ever get tired of pretending not to care?" His gaze met hers, unflinching. "Do you?" The silence between them was heavier than the storm outside. She wanted to argue. She wanted to laugh. She wanted to close the distance. Instead, she pulled the blanket tighter and lay back down, her heart hammering in ways she didn't want to examine. Connor returned to his chair, the lantern glow painting his features sharp and soft all at once. He didn't say another word. Neither did she. But as the storm howled against the glass, the space between them felt smaller than it had the night before. Chapter 5. Sparks in the Storm. The third day came without mercy. The storm hadn't broken. If anything, it had doubled down, pressing its icy weight against the rink like it meant to bury the building entirely. Lake sat curled on the couch, chin lifted with all the pride of a queen in exile, refusing to admit the boredom was killing her faster than the cold. She drummed her fingers against the armrest, her point shoes discarded at her feet. "I can't stand it anymore. I'm going mad." "You were already mad," Connor said from the chair, not looking up from the tool he was turning over in his hand. Some small repair had captured his attention, wires glinting in the dim light. She huffed. "You're insufferable." "Do you know that?" "Frequently told." "I require stimulation." He finally looked up, his amber eyes gleaming with amusement. "You're a ballerina trapped in a snowstorm. Not much stimulation to be had unless you want to count push-ups." She gasped. "Do I look like someone who does push-ups?" "You look like someone who needs them." She shot to her feet, scandalized. "I'll have you know my arms are perfectly sculpted for their purpose." "Waving them around on stage?" "For artistry," she snapped, marching toward him, blanket swirling around her like a cape. "You wouldn't understand. You're all brute force and growling. Growling keeps people alive, and art keeps people human." They glared at each other, inches apart now. Lake could feel the heat radiating from him, infuriating, in the way it made the cold air suddenly irrelevant. His jaw was set, his eyes sharp, but beneath the alpha steel she thought she caught something else, something dangerous, something curious. "You're impossible," she whispered. "You've said that 3 times, he murmured back. Before she could think of a sharper insult, he smirked and stood, towering over her. "Fine. If you need stimulation, I'll give you a challenge." "A challenge?" He gestured toward the rink below. "You dance. I'll skate." Lake blinked. "You skate?" "Not the way you think," he said. "But I know ice." Curiosity overcame her pride. Together, they stepped onto the frozen surface, the vast sheet glowing under the lanterns they'd set along the boards. Lake moved carefully at first, point shoes pressing into the slick surface, balance hard-earned. Connor stepped out with boots meant for ground, but somehow he moved steady, fluid, as though the ice obeyed him instead of the other way around. "You're cheating," she accused. "Adaptation," he said simply. She spun, arms sweeping high, letting muscle memory do what reason warned against. Her spin wobbled, and before she could correct it, his hand shot out, catching her waist. She gasped. heat flashing across her body where his palm pressed. "Careful," he said, his voice lower now. "I don't need your help. You keep saying that. I mean it." His hand lingered a moment longer than necessary before he released her. "Then prove it." Challenge accepted. Lake pushed herself harder, moving across the ice in wide arcs, leaps and turns that tested the limits of both her balance and her pride. Connor followed, matching her movements with his own steady, prowling strides. It wasn't a dance. It wasn't skating. It was something else entirely, something that made the storm outside feel small. By the time they collapsed onto the bleachers, breath fogging the air, Lake was flushed and exhilarated. She hated that she enjoyed it. She hated that she'd caught herself laughing, real and unguarded, when he slipped slightly and cursed under his breath. She leaned back, catching her breath. "You're not as bad as I thought." He raised an eyebrow. "That's high praise coming from you." "Don't get used to it," she warned. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable this time. The storm pounded the windows, the rink hummed under their feet, and for the first time since being trapped, Lake didn't feel like the walls were closing in. Later, back in the office, she curled beneath her blanket again. Connor settled into his chair, lantern glow carving his profile into sharp lines. "Connor," she said suddenly. He glanced over. "What? Why were you here that night?" "Really? Not patrolling? Not pretending to mop floors? Why were you here?" He held her gaze for a long moment, then looked back at the lantern. "Because this is my ground, and I knew a storm was coming." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you'll get tonight." She rolled her eyes, sinking deeper into the blanket. "Infuriating. Frequently," he said, but his mouth curved just slightly, and though she would never admit it, Lake fell asleep with a smile tugging at her lips. Chapter 6, Thin Ice. The fourth day inside the rink dawned in a silence so heavy it felt unnatural. The storm still howled, but the rhythm of it had changed, less frantic, more steady, like it had settled in for the long haul. Lake stood at the window, forehead pressed against the cold glass, her reflection pale and stubborn. "This is absurd," she muttered. 4 days, 4 days of soup, dust blankets, and your unbearable face." Behind her, Connor's voice rumbled low. "Good morning to you, too." She spun, her blanket trailing like a cape. "It's not morning. It's purgatory. I've lost all sense of time. I could be 80 years old by now, for all I know." "You'd still complain." "I would not." "You'd complain louder," he said, smirking. Lake gasped, hand to her chest. "How dare you?" His smirk deepened. "Truth hurts." She stomped across the office, refusing to let his calm demeanor win again. He was too steady, too collected, too infuriatingly certain about everything. She hated it. She hated how much it made her want to shake him, or kiss him, or both. "Do you ever get rattled?" she demanded. He looked at her evenly. "Yes." "When?" "Now." The word dropped between them, simple and sharp. Lake froze. She had expected deflection. Another dry remark. Not honesty. Not that. She began, then snapped her mouth shut. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing her flustered. She tossed her hair and turned away. "Well, good. You deserve it." "Do I?" "Yes." The day dragged. Lake practiced stretches on the boards, balancing with practiced grace, her hair pinned up again with ruthless precision. Connor walked his silent patrols, circling the rink as though the storm outside were watching. Every so often, their paths crossed, and each time the air grew heavier. By late afternoon, boredom finally got the better of her. She padded into the main rink, twirling once in the dim light. "We should play a game." Connor arched an eyebrow. "A game." "Yes." We're not children, she grinned. Oh, so you're afraid you'll lose. His eyes narrowed, the faintest flicker of challenge sparking. Name it. Truth or dare? His jaw flexed. No. Yes, she pressed. Unless you're scared. Of you? He snorted. Not likely. Then prove it. He sighed, as though regretting every choice that had led him to this moment. Fine. Truth. Lake's smile was wicked. Have you ever been in love? For a long moment, silence. He stared at her like the storm outside had slipped into her question. Then he said simply, yes. She blinked, caught off guard. She hadn't expected honesty. She'd expected some glib dismissal, something to keep her at arm's length. Oh? My turn, he said. Truth or dare? She lifted her chin. Dare. I dare you, he said smoothly, to eat soup without complaining. Her jaw dropped. You monster. Rules are rules. She grabbed the nearest mug, scowled into it, and took a dramatic sip. I hate you. You're still drinking. She drained half the mug, slammed it down, and glared at him. Satisfied? Very. The game continued into the night, with Lake daring him to reveal his middle name. He refused, which she declared cheating, and Connor daring her to sit still for 10 minutes without talking. She lasted 3. Each round stripped something away. Armor, distance, excuses. By the time they lay back on opposite ends of the couch, lantern glow soft around them, Lake realized she was smiling. Not the polite stage smile, not the smug one she wore for rivals. A real smile, one that hurt her cheeks. You're not as bad as I thought, she whispered. Neither are you, he said quietly. The storm pounded on. The rink groaned. And between them something shifted, fragile as thin ice, and just as dangerous. Chapter 7. Fire and Frost. By the 5th day, the rink no longer felt like a building. It felt like a world. The storm still pressed against the glass, blinding the outside, erasing the city. Lake woke to the sound of Connor moving through the corridors, boots echoing steady and unhurried. He always walked like he owned the ground beneath him, like the air bent itself around his stride. It was infuriating. It was reassuring. She sat up on the couch, hair spilling loose around her shoulders, blanket slipping down her arms. You pace like a caged animal, she called out. He appeared in the doorway, eyes gleaming faintly in the half-light. Better than whining like a caged princess. She gasped. I am not whining. I am articulating my suffering. Loudly. You'd miss it if I stopped. His mouth quirked in a way that almost looked like agreement. Maybe. Lake rose, padding toward the rink, her bare feet whispering against the cold floor. She stood at the boards, staring at the vast sheet of ice that had been both prison and stage these past days. I hate it, she murmured. The ice? The silence. She turned, chin lifting in defiance. I was made for applause, for lights, for people watching. Without it, she faltered, surprised at the rawness creeping into her voice. Without it, I don't know who I am. Connor stepped closer, slow and deliberate. He didn't crowd her, but his presence filled the air between them. You know, he said quietly, you just don't trust it. She blinked at him, stunned. No one ever said things like that to her. No one ever looked past the costumes and the perfection. She laughed, brittle. What would you know about identity? You're just alpha. Exactly. His voice was sharp now. Everything I do, everything I am, it's for someone else. My pack, my people. You think I don't know what it's like to be swallowed by duty? Her breath caught. For once, she didn't have a retort. She turned back to the ice, hiding her face. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then Connor said, "Dance!" She spun on him. "Excuse me? Dance. Right now. No stage, no lights, no costumes. Just you." "That's ridiculous." "It's the truth. I don't dance without an audience. You have one." His gaze locked on hers, steady, unyielding. "Me." Her heart stuttered. For a long moment she just stood there, frozen in a way the storm could never manage. Then, slowly, she stepped onto the ice. Her toes curled against the chill. She lifted her arms, breath filling her lungs, and let muscle memory take over. The first movement was stiff, awkward. The second was better. By the third, she was moving across the rink in wide arcs, turns and leaps that spilled out of her like secrets. No music, no applause, just the scrape of skin on ice and the sound of her own heartbeat. When she finally stopped, breathless, hair tumbling loose around her face, Connor was standing at the edge of the ice. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned. "Well?" she demanded, chest heaving. He stepped forward, boots crunching against the frost. "That's the first time you've actually danced since we got stuck here." She flushed, furious at how much the words mattered. "Don't think you can analyze me like one of your patrols." "I already did." His voice was low, dangerous in its honesty. "And I like what I see." Her breath hitched. She should have laughed. She should have mocked him, dismissed him, spun away. Instead, she stood rooted to the ice, heart hammering against her ribs. The tension shattered when the lights flickered again, plunging the rink into near darkness. Lake gasped, stumbling back. Connor caught her wrist, steady and strong. "It's fine." Generator still holding. She looked up at him, their faces inches apart, his hand warm around her wrist. The storm raged outside, but here, in this frozen prison, something else was burning. "Connor," she whispered. He held her gaze, his voice rough. "Careful, Swan." And then, as quickly as it came, the lights steadied. He released her, stepping back, the space between them suddenly too wide. Lake wrapped her arms around herself, furious at the trembling in her hands. "I still hate soup," she muttered. His mouth curved in a ghost of a smile. "Good. I'd be worried if you didn't." That night, as the storm clawed at the windows and the lantern burned low, Lake lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Across the room, Connor sat in his chair, arms crossed, eyes closed but not asleep. The silence between them was thick, alive. And for the first time, Lake wondered if being snowed in wasn't a curse after all, but the beginning of something far more dangerous. Chapter 8. The Wolf and the Swan. By the 6th day, the rink felt less like a prison and more like a stage built for just the two of them. The storm hadn't lifted. The windows were still half buried in white, the doors sealed by drifts, but inside the air had changed. Warmer, tighter, charged. Lake sat at the boards with her legs stretched long, brushing chalky rosin powder across her toes, as though ritual could keep her sane. Connor walked slow laps around the rink, boots echoing, eyes sweeping the edges like a sentry who never tired. He always moved like he was listening to things no one else could hear. "Do you ever stop?" she asked suddenly. "Stop what?" "Pacing, watching, brooding, acting like the world is about to break through the doors." His gaze cut to her, sharp. "It might?" "This is a skating rink," she said dryly. "The only danger here is Zamboni fumes." He didn't answer, just kept walking. That infuriating calm, that impossible composure. Lake huffed, tossing her rosin bag aside. "You know what your problem is? You don't know how to relax." "And you do?" "Of course I do." She rose to her feet, crossing the ice with sharp, confident steps. Her blanket-turned cape trailed behind her like she was making an entrance on opening night. You're in the presence of a professional. Relaxation is a craft. Ballerinas don't relax. Wrong. She planted herself in front of him, chin high. We collapse with elegance. For the first time, his mouth tugged into a reluctant grin. Show me then. Lake blinked, caught off guard. She had expected him to scoff, not to call her bluff. Fine. She flopped dramatically onto the ice, sprawling like a fallen star. See? Perfection. Connor stopped above her, arms crossed, brow arched. You'll freeze. That's commitment. You're ridiculous. And you're boring. Something shifted in his gaze then, the grin fading into something heavier, darker. He crouched down, close enough that the warmth of him broke through the chill of the ice. You don't actually think I'm boring. Lake's breath hitched. The storm howled against the glass. The rink groaned, and suddenly the air between them was molten. She could smell him. Pine, earth, winter, and it made her pulse skip in ways she refused to name. You're smug, she whispered. Not smug. His voice was low, rough, certain. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She should have stood, spun away, thrown another insult. Instead, she stayed flat on the ice, staring up at him, caught. Connor reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. His hand lingered, warm against her skin. His eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. Then he stood, pulling back, retreating like a tide. Get up before you catch pneumonia. The spell shattered. Lake scrambled to her feet, cheeks burning. You're impossible. Frequently. The day dragged on, tension coiling tighter with every hour. They practiced together on the ice, his movements steady and wolf-like, hers sharp and precise. They circled each other, clashing, colliding, laughing once, just once, when he nearly slipped and she grabbed his arm without thinking. By evening, the soup tasted less like punishment and more like ritual. They sat in the office, lantern light soft between them. Lake leaned against the couch, her head tipped back, hair spilling loose. Connor sat in his chair, watching her with that unreadable expression that both infuriated and unsettled her. You're staring, she said. You noticed. Of course I noticed. I notice everything. He leaned forward, forearms braced on his knees. Then you've noticed this too. Noticed what? That you don't hate me as much as you pretend. Her breath caught. She forced a laugh, brittle. Ridiculous. Is it? Yes. Then say it again, he said softly. Look at me and say you hate me. Lake met his gaze, mouth open, words trembling on the tip of her tongue. But nothing came. The storm pounded, the lantern flickered, and she realized she couldn't say it. Not anymore. She turned away, furious with herself. You're insufferable. His voice followed her into the silence. You don't hate me. That night, she lay awake long after the lantern burned out, listening to the steady rhythm of his breath across the room. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if she wanted the storm to end at all. Chapter 9, The Breaking Point. The seventh day came with a silence so eerie it made Lake's skin prickle. The storm was still there, pressing and howling, but inside the rink the quiet between her and Connor had grown unbearable. Not because they weren't speaking. Oh no, they still sparred, still tossed barbs like knives across the room, but because every word now carried a weight neither of them wanted to name. Lake stood in front of the mirror in the office, fingers retying the ribbons of her last good pair of point shoes. Her reflection glared back at her, cheeks hollow from a week of soup and nerves, eyes brighter than she wanted to admit. You're going to tear your foot open again, Connor said from the doorway. I'll risk it, she replied, tying the knot tighter than necessary. Why? Because I can't let a storm decide who I am. She turned, defiant. If I stop dancing, I stop existing. His jaw flexed, his hands curling into fists. You're not defined by a stage. And you're not defined by a pack, she shot back. His eyes flashed, dangerous. I am. For a moment they stood, locked in a standoff that had nothing to do with snow or soup. It was about pride, about fear, about what happened when two people stripped themselves raw and hated what they saw, and loved it anyway. Lake stepped past him, out to the rink, and began to dance. Not with perfection, not with polish, but with fury. Each spin was a strike, each leap a scream. She danced until her breath tore and her muscles trembled. Connor watched, teeth clenched, until finally he stepped onto the ice. He didn't stop her. He didn't try. He just moved with her, prowling around her spirals, steady where she was wild, grounding her even as she tried to fly apart. It wasn't a duet. It was a battle, and it was theirs. When she collapsed onto the ice at last, he caught her before she hit. She sagged against him, trembling, sweat freezing in the air between them. Stubborn, he muttered into her hair. Smug, she breathed against his chest, but neither pulled away. Chapter 10. The Confession. That night, lantern light painted the office in a golden shadow. Lake sat curled on the couch, blanket draped around her, hair spilling loose. Connor leaned against the desk, arms crossed, watching her like he always did, too intently, too quietly. I don't get you, she said finally. Good. No, really. She leaned forward. Why are you here? Why this rink? Why me? He exhaled slowly, eyes flicking to the snow beyond the glass. Because this is my ground. And when I felt the storm coming, I knew it would trap someone. I didn't expect it to be you. But once it was, I wasn't leaving. Her heart lurched. Why? His gaze returned to hers, steady, unflinching. Because you make me feel like I'm not just protecting ground. Like I'm protecting something worth more than territory. Something worth... He cut himself off, jaw tightening. Worth what? She whispered. His silence was louder than the storm. Finally, he said, low and rough, worth staying for. The words landed like a blow. Lake's throat closed, her chest aching with something she didn't want to name. She laughed, brittle. That's ridiculous. Then tell me you don't feel it too. She opened her mouth, ready with an insult, a dismissal, something to push him back where he belonged. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she whispered, You're insufferable. And this time, it didn't sound like hate at all. Chapter 11. The Storm Breaks. On the 8th day, the storm finally cracked. The world outside began to take shape again. Streets carved by plows, rooftops sagging under snow, the faint sound of distant sirens returning. The doors were no longer buried, the exit lights steady and green. Freedom was waiting. Lake stood at the window, staring out at the city slowly re-emerging from its cocoon of white. Her heart should have leapt. She should have been running rehearsals in her head, planning her triumphant return. Instead, she felt hollow. It's over, she said quietly. Connor stood beside her, close enough that his shoulder brushed hers. It doesn't have to be. She turned, startled. What do you mean? You'll walk out those doors and go back to your stage. I'll go back to my patrols, and everything we found in here, he gestured around them, the rink, the blankets, the lanterns, vanishes, unless you want it not to. Her chest tightened. She wanted to laugh, to roll her eyes, to say something snide and clever. Instead, her voice trembled. I don't know if I can. Out there, I'm not me. I'm what they expect. He stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. Then stay who you are in here. The storm outside faded into silence, but inside, Lake's heart was louder than it had ever been. Chapter 12, Fire in the Ice. They left the rink together at dusk. The city was a wasteland of snow and broken branches, but to Lake it felt brighter than any spotlight. She walked beside Connor, his jacket heavy around her shoulders, her hand slipping into his like it had always belonged there. The world had changed, but so had she. When they reached the street, she stopped, staring up at him. So what now? You go back to your wolves, and I go back to my stage? He studied her, eyes burning in the fading light. No, we find a way to stand in both. She laughed softly, shaking her head. You make it sound so simple. It is. His hand tightened on hers. Because I'm not letting you go. She blinked up at him, tears stinging her eyes. Connor. And then his mouth was on hers, fierce and certain. The kiss tasting of storms and survival, of soup and silence, and every fight they'd thrown at each other in the dark. She melted against him, all her pride, all her stubbornness breaking into something softer, something terrifyingly real. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Lake laughed again, unsteady, wild. I still hate soup. Connor's grin was sharp and hungry. Good. We'll find you something better. The storm had ended. The doors were open. But as they walked into the night, Lake realized the rink hadn't been a prison at all. It had been the beginning. And for the first time, she didn't need applause to know she'd found her stage. Epilogue. After the storm. The city thawed slowly, reluctant to surrender the storm's grip. Weeks passed before the snow piles finally receded into gutters and drains, leaving behind streets wet with slush and trees bowed but unbroken. For most people, life returned to its rhythm. Work, errands, gossip, late-night traffic. The storm became a story to tell, a memory to laugh at. But for Lake and Connor, it was not a story that ended when the snow cleared. It was the beginning of everything. Lake had returned to her company with the kind of grand entrance only she could manage. Draped in her camel coat, chin high, point shoes tucked under her arm like a trophy, she swept into rehearsal as if she had conquered death itself. Whispers chased her through the studio, the storm, the disappearance, the missed days. Dancers murmured behind their hands, and the director arched a brow in a way that could mean either disappointment or admiration. Lake ignored them all. She moved across the studio floor with fire in her veins, each step sharper, each leap higher, each turn tighter than before. The storm hadn't weakened her. It had remade her. But even as applause returned, even as lights blazed and critics scribbled, she carried with her the quiet of the rink, the sound of soup simmering on a hot plate, the warmth of blankets that smelled faintly of dust, the burn of Connor's gaze across the ice. She saw him more than she expected. At first, she thought the storm had been a dream, that maybe she had conjured him from hunger and frost and loneliness. But then, after her first performance back, she found him in the wings, arms folded, expression unreadable. He didn't belong in a theater. He didn't belong anywhere civilized. And yet there he was, waiting for her. You came, she whispered, flushed from the final bow. I told you, he said simply. I wasn't letting you go. It became a rhythm. Lake's life spun back into rehearsals and stage lights, while Connor's prowled through shadows and streets. But between those worlds, they carved out something new. Late nights at diners where she ordered decadent pastries she claimed to hate. Early mornings in his territory, where she walked alongside him under pine trees and listened to the silence he wore like armor. They still fought, constantly. She mocked his endless soup recipes. He teased her for practicing fouettes in grocery store aisles. She demanded fine wine. He brought her coffee so bitter it made her scowl. He called her stubborn. She called him smug. But every fight ended in laughter, and every laugh ended in something softer, something hungrier. Sometimes, when the world pressed too hard, when directors barked and rivals sneered, she would find herself back at the rink. It had reopened quickly, the staff scraping ice smooth, the machines humming back to life. But to Lake, it wasn't just a rink anymore. It was the place where she had been stripped of stage and spotlight and discovered she was still herself. She would stand on the boards, watching the ice gleam under the lights, and remember the storm, the silence. The moment Connor had said, "Dance, I'll watch." And sometimes he was there waiting for her, leaning against the boards, arms crossed, eyes burning with the same intensity that had unnerved her in the beginning. She would roll her eyes, call him impossible, and then step out onto the ice. And he would watch. Always. They never called it love at first. Lake was too proud, too stubborn to admit it. Connor was too steady, too cautious to name it aloud. But it was there, stitched into every argument, every glance, every time she pretended not to smile when he carried her grocery bags like they weighed nothing. It was there when she danced, when he walked beside her, when they sat together in quiet that no longer felt empty. One evening, months after the storm, Lake returned from rehearsal to find him waiting outside her building. He was leaning against the lamppost, jacket zipped, hood pulled low. But she felt him before she saw him. "Don't you ever text like a normal person?" she demanded, exasperated. "I told you," he said, straightening. "I don't need a phone. I have ears." "You are a menace," she sighed, though her lips curved. He stepped closer, eyes catching the light. "And you love it." She tilted her chin, feigning disdain. "I tolerate it." "Liar." He kissed her then, right there under the street lamp, with the city buzzing around them and snow still clinging stubbornly to the corners of the street. And she kissed him back, with all the pride and ferocity of a woman who had finally met her match. Later, in the quiet of his territory, she asked him what he had thought that first night, when she'd called him Janitor. "I thought you were impossible," he said. "And now?" she pressed. "Now I know you are," he said, "and I wouldn't change it." Lake laughed, the sound ringing through the trees like music. "Good, because I don't intend to change for anyone." "Good," he echoed, his hand tightening around hers, "because I didn't fall for perfect. I fell for you." The storm was long gone. The ice had melted. But for Lake and Connor, the rink remained inside them, a place of fire and frost, of battles and beginnings. And though the world outside returned to normal, nothing between them ever would again. Because the ballerina who demanded applause had found someone who saw her even in silence, and the alpha who guarded his territory had found someone worth guarding forever.